It's worth really evaluating if this job is worth it for you and if these types of difficult scenarios that you're running into every day are worth pushing through and finding the right solution. We all face challenging and sometimes difficult situations at work, like when our boss asks us to do something last minute, or if someone asks for a favor just as you're about to leave the office. And usually, in those cases, you just have to grit your teeth and get through it. But other times, the solution isn't as easy. How should you proceed in those situations? What should you say? In this video, we'll take a look at 5 common situations and find out. Before we get started, it's important to remember that no company is perfect and everyone could have a bad day. However, the difference between a rough day and a truly toxic work environment is really important to keep in mind. As we go through these scenarios, ask yourselves, how frequently do these things happen to me? And when they do, how do the people around me react and respond to them? Sometimes it's a really fine line between these types of situations. So if this is something that you face regularly, you have to constantly reassess your situation and make sure that you're being your own advocate. If you can, make sure you get an outside opinion, speak with a friend, a trusted colleague, a career coach, a mentor, and make sure you get some outside opinions to see what they think. Some things that you want to keep an eye on. Is this a once in a blue moon type of deal, or does this happen on the regular? Is the environment that of a team that's willing to work together to make sure that the issue is solved and that a solution is devised with a lot of coordination across the different teams and with each other? Or is it a constant mental battle of competing priorities? Work can sometimes be really stressful, but it's never worth letting it get in the way of living your life to the fullest. I know this can be a really sensitive and sometimes a difficult topic for some to talk about, so I do want to take the time out to acknowledge that. So with that said, let's take a look at 5 common difficult situations that we all face at work and how we should respond. Situation number 1. You find it really challenging and difficult to speak up during meetings. A shout out to all my introverted kings and queens out there, because I know sometimes it can be really intimidating to speak up in a big meeting. Picture this. You're sitting in a meeting with a lot of people there, and the speaker says something that doesn't add up or that doesn't make sense to you. You think about raising your hand or saying something, and you're rephrasing the question over and over in your head just to get it perfect so that you don't embarrass yourself. By the time you have the question all ready and queued up and you're about to raise your hand, the speaker has already moved on, and it's awkward to now speak up about that. So, what can we do? You can prepare before the meeting so that you feel a lot more confident. Thinking about the questions that you might ask, writing them down, it helps remove that inner monologue that you're always going to have so that you're ready and prepared to ask the question right away. It also allows you time to prepare stats and other supporting information that might make you feel more confident when you're asking the question. It might feel awkward and weird, but if you happen to know the person that's going to be leading the meeting or asking the questions, speak with them beforehand if you have that type of relationship and let them know that you might have a couple of questions that you want to ask, and see if they're willing to call on you or if they allow the proper amount of time for you to feel comfortable to speak up. You can also ask questions, because sometimes questions are a lot easier to ask than making a statement or calling somebody out if it's a difficult or sensitive topic. Asking a question helps keep the conversation going, and generally the speaker or whoever answers is already talking to you, so it's easy to parlay that or make that a on-ramp for further conversation and additional questions that you might have. There are also a lot of things that you can do outside of work to continue to improve your public speaking abilities, to continue to grow the confidence that you have when it comes to public speaking and communicating in work environments. One thing that I like to do is think about any type of email or meeting or really any type of work communication as a story-worthy moment. There's going to be a beginning, a middle, and an end. So think about who's your audience. You're going to speak to a group of interns very differently than you're going to speak with your CEO. So make sure that you tailor your communication type and how you talk about certain things, and even the information that you share based on the audience that you're communicating with. In terms of the beginning, think about what is the topic that you want to discuss. Make sure that you set the proper agenda and expectations when it comes to whatever the communication is going to be. And secondly, for the bulk of the story, the middle part, what is the core information that you want this person to have? Don't go into too much detail, because by doing that, you're going to lose your audience, and that's generally when people start to lose interest and start thinking about other things, and at that point, you've already lost their attention. And then lastly, what do you want the takeaway to be? Are you sharing this information for awareness, or do you have an ask or a request, or are you trying to get more information? How does the story end? By thinking about it and breaking it down in these 3 ways, it makes it feel a lot more structured, and it makes any meeting or even an email feel a lot more straight and to the point, and it's going to be easier for people to digest it and respond. There's also organizations out there, if you're so inclined, like Toastmasters, which is actually a US-based nonprofit organization that focuses and emphasizes on communication and public speaking. If you happen to be by a local branch, or maybe it's something that your company hosts within their offices, it's definitely worth taking a look at and looking into to see if it's the right fit and to see if it's helpful for you. Situation number 2. You're being asked to take care of things that are outside of your job description or outside of your scope. Now, especially if you're a high performer, it's not uncommon to run into these type of scenarios where you're being asked to do a lot of things. After all, if you're good at your job, you have people's trust, and they want you to work on things that are going to be important because they know that you're going to be able to get it done. This one is particularly tricky because sometimes you want to help out a coworker, help out someone who really needs it, and maybe they're going through a tight deadline themselves. But make sure that you're drawing the proper boundaries. It's always great to be able to help out a coworker and so go above and beyond because that shows the initiative. However, your priorities are what's most important. So if this is going to get in the way of you doing your own job, then obviously it needs to be something that's potentially reassessed. Let's say a coworker or even your manager or a boss or whoever comes to you and asks you to do something. If you don't have the capacity to do it, there's a couple ways that you can respond. The first thing is you can offer an alternative timeline. You can say something like, "Hey, I'm really sorry. I have a lot on my plate at the moment, so I don't think I'll be able to get this to you right away, but how about end of week? Is that something that works for you?" You can ask to potentially delegate the task as well. You can say something like, "I'm currently a bit packed with work right now, but I think this is something that Bill might be able to help you with. Do you want me to make the introduction so that he can take a look and see if he's available to help you out?" And then 3, you can see if maybe there's other resources out there that the original requester can reference to help self-serve the request. You can say, "I don't think this is something that I can do right now, but have you checked out resource X? It's something that I'm familiar with, and I think you might be able to get the answer from that." What's most important is that you don't shut down the request right away. Providing an alternative makes the original requester feel like this is something that you've truly listened to and that you care about, and it gives them additional options if it's something that you can't potentially help them with. This can be really challenging if the person that's asking you is your manager, your boss, or someone that's higher than you. Definitely understand it can feel awkward to even say any of those suggestions, so what can you potentially say? If it's someone like your manager that's familiar with your workload, it might be easier to say something like this. "As you know, I'm really busy working on X, Y, and Z right now, but I definitely understand how important this ask is. I can take care of it right now, but that would mean that I might have to hold off on X until next week. Is it okay if we make that trade-off?" If this is someone like your CEO or in another really high position, even something like that can feel super weird to say. So, in those situations, I would recommend something like this. "We'll definitely make sure that this gets taken care of by tomorrow. I'm personally working against the clock to take care of some other really key important deliverables, but let me speak with Bill and we'll make sure that it gets done on time." The person asking doesn't necessarily care that it's you that's doing it, but that it gets done. Reassuring them that the timeline that they asked you will be met is what's more important, not necessarily that you're doing it, but it's important to communicate these things, which is why I personally lean on this type of response in these circumstances. It's also important to remember that everyone is going through their own difficulties and probably their version of this type of situation and scenario. So avoid the sob story and complaining and venting about how much work you have or how busy you are, because really that's not going to earn you any sympathy points. And frankly, no one probably cares. The last thing you want to do is make your manager or make your colleague or make someone else on your team look bad. So avoid the negativity route and focus on what's possible and what are alternatives that help create the most win-win situation. Situation number 3. What happens when one of your colleagues is constantly dropping the ball, missing deadlines, difficult to get a hold of, and makes promises but never delivers? Now, this is a really awkward and challenging situation because talking to somebody about how they're not good at their job is going to be hard no matter how you approach it. But before you start the conversation, think about potential reasons as to why this might be happening. Generally speaking, most people don't want to be bad at their job, so there could be some type of external forces or other circumstances that might be causing this situation. Maybe they're super overwhelmed with something else at work or personally speaking, or some other detail about their life that you might not personally know about. Something else to keep in mind is that if we're not good at communicating or if we don't communicate properly, we might have set an expectation with somebody, but they didn't receive and have that same expectation themselves. So it's not that they're avoiding you or trying to not do something that you're asking, but they might just not know that this is what you're looking for or that you're waiting for them to complete something. And also, when you speak with them, make sure that it's in a private, one-on-one type setting. You don't want to blow up their spot in a huge meeting because that's just going to make them get defensive and potentially offended that you even brought it up in that type of situation. This can also be a really emotional type of conversation, so make sure that you just stick with the facts. Don't accuse them or say anything in an accusatory tone, but try to remain calm and try to remain understanding the best you can. You can say something like, "Hey, over the past couple of weeks, There have been a couple milestones that you've missed or haven't been able to meet. I was hoping that we could maybe privately speak about it to see how we can work together to make sure that this doesn't become a bigger issue. Maybe after the conversation, you find out that it's some type of external issue. Maybe they have a ton on their plate themselves and they haven't been able to handle it. Or it can be something personal that they don't want to either talk about or something that you really don't have control over. No matter what the situation may be, try to be there and try to help them. Maybe setting up regular check-ins with them could be beneficial so that they know that they're staying on track. And if anything starts to steer off the original timeline, because you guys are meeting more regularly and often, you're able to flag that much sooner and course correct as needed. And if you have the capacity and are willing, set some type of time-bound expectation and offer to potentially help them out. You can say something like, I'm really happy to reach out to the client this week on your behalf in order to free up your time a little bit to work on some of these other priorities. The reason why I say time-bound is so that this doesn't become a continued expectation and that they continue to lean on you to take care of this, even if it's not necessarily your job starting the next month or week or whenever. You don't want this to become some type of habit where they continue to lean on you and depend on you. So make sure that these expectations are very clearly stated and aligned on. If this continues to be an issue, speak with your manager, speak with their manager to make sure that they're aware of the situation. They may be able to provide additional recommendations, and especially if it's their manager, they obviously have a bit more control over next steps and alternatives as to how they could continue to work with this person to make sure that they're good and contributing member to the project team. Situation number 4. What happens when the person that you're working with is really rude or difficult to work with? Similar to the prior situation, you want to make sure that this stays professional and it doesn't become an emotional or personal matter. Your first approach should be to try and have a very honest and private conversation. See if maybe this person has a few minutes that you can set aside to have a one-on-one conversation. You can go straight to the point and ask something like, hey, based on a couple of different interactions that we've had in the past, I felt like you were potentially upset with me based on the way that you acted or based on your actions. Have I done something to potentially upset you? Even if the person says no and denies it, there's a good chance that this type of behavior may continue. It could be that this person just doesn't like their circumstance or the particular situation that they find themselves in, or maybe it's a personal dislike of you for whatever reason. It's not necessarily something that you can have control over. The important thing to keep in mind here is you don't have to make this person your friend. However, what is important is that you continue to maintain that professionalism in all situations, no matter what. See if there's ways that you can limit the number of interactions that you have to have with this person. It also might be worth speaking with your manager or their manager as well to see if there's anything that they might be able to do. And even if there's no changes necessarily, I think it's important to make sure that this is well documented so that this doesn't come to somehow potentially impact you negatively down the line. When it comes to situations like this, there's really not a whole lot you can do because you can't necessarily remove someone from your team or ask them to step away just because you don't like each other. This person might be a very key individual on your project team. And so, unfortunately, in a lot of ways, you just have to suck it up and continue to work with them to the best of your abilities. However, I've always found that if I reflect that negativity back at them, it only makes the situation worse. So no matter how hard it might be, try to put on a smile, be professional, and continue to work together in the best way that you can. Obviously, there are boundaries that we all have to maintain and respect when it comes to working in a professional environment. So if any of those boundaries do get crossed, speak with someone from HR or the proper individual depending on your company, because there aren't any excuses for that type of behavior. And finally, scenario number 5. Your work is starting to take over your life. There's always going to be seasons where you might have to put in a couple more hours than usual, right before a launch, or if there's a particular busy season in your line of work. Obviously, those are just circumstances that hopefully you're aware of and that you're willing to accept. However, if work continues to feel super overwhelming outside of those circumstances, this can signal some type of potential imbalance. It's not always necessarily workload, but it can also come in the form of a colleague or a manager continue to reach out to you outside of work hours, during the evenings, over the weekend, during your time off, etc. You need to have a very philosophical conversation with yourself to determine what are your personal boundaries that you're not going to compromise. Are there specific days or times that are just completely off limits to work? Maybe you have a particular family function or some other type of responsibility that starts at 6 or 7 o'clock that you're just not willing to let work get in the way of. Or if the weekend is super important to you, unless there's some type of immediate priority type of emergency, that you're just not going to let work cross that boundary. Whatever the case may be, make sure that you personally understand and set the expectation of what those priorities are going to look like. Once you have this list, make sure that you set up a conversation with your manager, your boss, or whoever the appropriate person is, and share this list with them. Come with an open mind, which doesn't mean that you necessarily have to be flexible on the non-negotiables, but be willing to talk, negotiate, and see if there's a potential win-win situation or scenario that you can both reach agreement on. Maybe there's some concessions that you can both agree to. For example, if the evenings after work hours are completely off limits to you, and there's a particular need for a short period of time for you to work overtime or for you to potentially work on things that require more than the standard 40 hours a week or whatever your standard work hours might look like, are you willing to log on a little earlier to make sure that this work does get completed? Maybe travel is really difficult for you. Are you able to potentially talk about working from home more days to save you the commute and other potential distractions so that you can get more work done? And you can also think about if this additional work and these additional responsibilities are potential indications that you might need a new job title or a promotion. Maybe this can be a conversation that you have with your manager about a raise or a promotion, and make sure to bring your accomplishments, the different responsibilities that you have, as potential leverage when you have this conversation. And then lastly, think about if this job is really worth it for you. Could this be a potential signal that you might need to start job searching? Remember, having an open mind doesn't mean that you have to compromise on your core values or beliefs. So these are 5 common scenarios that all of us deal with when it comes to the workplace. And when we talk about these types of situations, it might lead you to think about leaving the company or looking for another job, like we just talked about. When you do start having these thoughts and you start looking at what else might be out there, one of my personal beliefs is that you should always be running to something opposed to running away from something. In other words, is a new job experience something that's going to continue to help you grow and further your career? Or are you looking for a job just because it's not the job that you currently have? Running away from these circumstances can sometimes lead us to taking the wrong next step or the wrong opportunity and actually be a step back when it comes to our career growth and development. At the end of the day, a lot of these things are things that can potentially be addressed or fixed by having some important conversations and putting the work into it. So I would highly encourage you to take some of these steps before deciding that it's time to go. Now, it's going to be impossible to cover every situation, but with that said, there are some things that should have an absolutely zero tolerance policy. If you happen to find yourself in a harmful environment, whether that means you're getting bullied, assaulted, discriminated against, or harassed, or think you're in danger, you need to address this immediately. These types of behaviors can come in all different shapes and sizes. So if something doesn't feel right, make sure you speak with a trusted colleague or HR to sort this out ASAP. These are scenarios that should not be acceptable in any situation. Take them seriously and expect an appropriate level of response from those around you as well, because you deserve that. A workplace is supposed to be a safe place and environment, and there is no place for inappropriate behavior. Make sure that you seek help from the proper individuals and authorities if you find yourself in any of those types of potentially dangerous circumstances. And in many cases, you might have to personally remove yourself from that type of environment so that no harm comes to you. Like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, it's not worth letting work get in the way of living your life to the fullest. So if you feel like you're compromising who you are and what you're potentially looking to accomplish in life, it's worth really evaluating if this job is worth it for you and if these types of difficult scenarios that you're running into every day are worth pushing through and finding the right solution. However, if you do like your job, the company that you're working with, the team that you're working with, you don't want to let any of these common roadblocks derail you and get in the way of allowing you to have a successful career. It's really challenging when talking about these in these types of videos because every situation is so nuanced and different. So obviously these are very high-level guidelines that you can potentially consider and draw inspiration from, but always make sure that you're being your number one advocate and that you're setting yourself up for happiness and success, because your work is something that you should be proud of and something that does bring you fulfillment. So with all that said, if you have any questions, comments, or thoughts, leave them below and we'll talk about them in the next video. And until then, be kind and do good.